Rev up your engines!
Well, don't say I didn't warn you. Treasury Secretary of the United States says, gee, the U.S. is going to run out of cash by June 1st. Now, what it comes down to is the government operates on borrowed money. And, of course, now the interest rates are going up, so they can no longer pay even the interest, which was tiny before, which is now larger. So, technically, the federal government will be bankrupt. Now, of course, this crap happens all the time. Realize since 1960, the federal debt level has been extended into the future or revised to a higher level 78 times. That's 78 times since 1960. So talk about passing the buck. There was a president of the United States that had a sign that said the buck stops here. Well, today the buck doesn't stop anywhere because they're all full of horse manure. They're spending money they don't have, borrowed tons of money, and now it's come home to roost. Now borrowing money isn't as free as it was. It was almost zero interest for decades, right? Now the interest rate's going up. They can't afford to pay any of it back, the interest. Forget the principal. They can't even touch the interest when the interest rate gets high. So then the government, all they do is say, oh, we'll raise the debt limit. Now we can borrow more money. And we're even more in debt, but who cares, you know? Fiscal irresponsibility is obviously numero uno with the government today. But it's not just today. I mean, look, since 1960, they've changed it 78 times. So every time there's a problem, instead of saying, gee, maybe we shouldn't spend as much, or maybe we shouldn't do this. Oh, well, we'll just raise the limit, right? The problem is by raising the limit, they allow rampant inflation. The money is worth less and less as the country becomes more and more in debt. Now, if the government did default, it'd be the first time that it ever happened. So, you know, it's not going to happen. The BS politicians on both sides will be cutting deals in Washington, and they'll end up raising the debt ceiling like they always do. And who pays for it? Us as taxpayers, right? Either we pay more tax or our money is worth less and less, which is the same as paying more taxes. You have less things you can do with your money as things cost more because money's worth less, especially stuff coming from foreign countries. Like I say, they operate on borrowed money. Listen to this. The Treasury plans to increase borrowing through the end of this quarter, totaling $726 billion, or about $449 billion more than the projection was earlier this year. Okay, earlier this year. January, February, March, April, right? So we got 4 months, a third of the year, and already they're saying, oh, well, I guess our projections were off. 449 to 726 billion, quite a bit off, right? And then they'll just do as they always do. They'll either raise the ceiling or they'll move it into the next year. Well, we'll take these figures and we won't count them for 2023. We'll push them into 2024 and we'll just keep pushing it into the future. They've been doing this forever, but it is a big deal now because the government has been operating on basically free borrowed money for decades, and now it's coming home to roost. The interest rates are going up and they're scrambling to see what they can do. And as usual, they're politicians. They don't know what they're doing. Everybody takes their own stand and we're not going to move. We're not going to move. Meanwhile, we, the middle class, pay for the whole shooting match. As Cal 2012 says, my 2012 Acura jerks. It's a 2012 Acura MDX. 104,000 miles. It doesn't shift, mainly between 10 and 20, but it's smooth after 20. I bought this car used. I had a transmission done at 50,000 miles. After the jerky shifting, I did 3 full tranny flushes, and the timing belt was changed by a Honda mechanic. I got PO 776 and 747. Mechanic changed the solenoid valve body, but it still does the same thing. Now he says I have to change the transmission. Now, what should I do? Well, unfortunately for your transmission probably is going out. That's the gears that generally go out. And you're shifting to those gears. You've tried absolutely everything you could do, but the guy changed the solenoids. It didn't make any difference. Well, the guy who changed the solenoids, he was just guessing. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll change the solenoids because of those codes. He should have done some bidirectional testing. And if he would have the machine to do bidirectional testing like I do, he could see I'm commanding it and the solenoid's working. No, the solenoid is working. It doesn't have a problem. He guessed, he wasted your money, and now he's telling you you need a transmission. Well, he should have done the bidirectional testing in the first place and say, no, there's nothing wrong with the solenoids. Now, when there's nothing wrong with the solenoids and they trip those codes, there's only really 2 things that can be wrong. One is the main computer that has the transmission control module built into it. That could be bad, not sending the right information, but in your case, it's almost always internal to the transmission, that even though the solenoid's getting the right information, the inside of the transmission's worn, and it won't shift right, especially when it's cold. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, I'd start looking for another car, because rebuilding one of those transmissions on an Acura MDX is a really expensive endeavor, and you got to have a pro. You can't just go to some clown automatic transmission rebuilder and, oh yeah, we can fix it, don't worry about it. No, it doesn't work that way. You need an absolute expert to do one of those transmissions. And when you see what that actually costs, you'll probably think about getting another car. Jay Hark says, I got a 2000 Nissan Xterra that overheats, 240,000 miles. Automatic transmission. If I run the AC for a period of time, my vehicle starts to feel sluggish and the needle starts to go up a little from the middle. I live in Las Vegas. I've replaced the thermostat water pump and flushed out the cooling system, but it's still a problem. Okay, I can tell you what your problem is. Just replace the radiator. Now, you flushed out the cooling system. That does almost zilch on a modern car. Modern cars have what are called plastic radiators, which is kind of a misnomer, because the tank on the top is plastic, the tank on the bottom is plastic, but the cooling part is aluminum metal. And the problem with aluminum metal is it doesn't rust, but it corrodes. And over time, you got 240,000 miles, the inside corrodes enough that it no longer dissipates heat that well. Now, when you turn your car's AC system on, then all the hot air in your car is pumped out of the AC condenser, which is in the front of the car, in front of the radiator. When you turn your AC on, that makes hotter air go into your car's radiator, because the condenser is in front of the radiator. So it puts even hotter air. You think it's hot enough in Las Vegas in the summer, right? I was just there. It gets hot, right? But now you're adding even hotter air to the radiator, because it's taking your air conditioning condenser hot air and blowing that in front of it. The reason it's getting somewhat warmer and stuff is that it's not working right, because the radiator is just old and corroded. And you can flush it until Hades comes over. It will not fix a corroded aluminum radiator. When they're corroded, you just have to replace them, because they can't dissipate heat, and you can't get rid of that internal corrosion. Now, if you're curious, when you get another radiator, cut your old radiator in half and look inside, and you'll see all this corrosion inside. That's just what happens with aluminum radiators. Big Bad Bull 32 says, what additive should I use? I got 2011 BMW 550. At idling, it lets out smoke. Some say it's the valve stem seals. I said, you had an additive that could lubricate them and fix it. Could you tell me what the additive is? Well, the additive's AT205 reseal, but in your case, I doubt if it's going to help. It's good for oil seals in the engine, like front oil seal, rear oil seal, transmission oil seals. But you're talking about valve seals. The valve seals are inside the engine above the intake valves, so it doesn't suck it in. Now, you say that when it idles, it's smoking. I can just about guarantee you got bad valve seals. That's notorious for those BMWs, and the only way to fix it is to tear the engine apart, put all new valve seals, and cost a small fortune. My advice is, oil is cheap. Seal jobs cost a fortune. I would just keep buying oil. Now, I wouldn't buy a BMW in many particular instances because of that. A lot of them do have bad valve seals. Not all of them. But those are all endless money pit cars anyways. And it's now 13 years old. And believe you me, BMW X-Drive vehicles, they're endless money pits as they age. This is just the beginning. You might think about time to get rid of it and get something that can last longer. But if you do want to fix it, you're going to have to take the engine apart and have the valve seals replaced. Very expensive job. 1973 Cuda says, I have a ground wire fault. I got an '07 Volkswagen. The code say it's a bad ground fault, and it has a crank position sensor code, throttle position sensor code, and a MAV code. Now, could the bad ground cause all these? Well, yes, certainly can. Realize this. All the power in your car, it's a 12-volt system, direct current. So you got to have a whole circular pass. You need positive power, you need negative ground. You need both. So if all your sensors are okay, but the grounds are bad, it can trip codes for all those sensors because the grounds are bad. So what you want to do is see if your crank sensor and the MAV sensor share a common ground, and that'll be the ground that's bad. You have all kinds of sensors and modules on that Volkswagen, dozens of computer modules, right? And they all have to be grounded, but they don't all have one ground wire. They share them. So look around, and maybe you'll find lucky one of the ground wires all rusted and corroded. Take it off, clean it up, and put it back on. Get yourself a wiring diagram for your Volkswagen and start looking through, and you'll probably find this one ground that's tripping everything. Big D says, why does my car have a battery case with a fan? I got a 2020 Honda Pilot. Why does it have a full battery case with its own air intake and a fan? Seems unnecessary. Batteries get hot when they're being charged, and if they're discharged extremely quick, like if you're a big stereo system, you're running a bunch of power, they'll also get hot when they discharge. And having a fan will keep them from having any problems. And it will also extend the life of the battery. It's actually a good thing. Of course, it costs money to make it, so most people are not going to build them that way. Maybe a guy added it on. It'll keep the battery from overheating. It'll give it a longer lifespan. It's a logical thing, because you take any modern hybrid or electric car, they have to cool their batteries. But in their case, they generally use liquid cooling, just like your car's engine. They have antifreeze in it and a cooling fan and a thermostat to make sure the battery doesn't overheat. And if yours is just a regular car with a regular battery, adding a little fan and an air duct is not a bad idea. It'll extend the life of the battery for sure. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.